afternoon to you, and thank you so much for finding time to joining me this afternoon. This is Diaspora Dispatches, and today I'll be bringing you the latest news from the continent of Africa. My name is Miriam Ogutu, and it's just about 4 minutes past 3 p.m. here in Nairobi, and we start with some breaking news right now. A federal high court sitting in Umuahia, the Abia state capital, has ordered the federal government to pay the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Kanu, the sum of 500 million Nigerian naira as damages for following his illegal abduction and human rights abuse from Kenya. The court also ordered the federal government to return him to Kenya, from where he was extradited to Nigeria on June 19, 2021. The court, presided by Justice E.N. Anyadike, insisted the extradition of Kanu from Kenya without recourse to the legal process was a flagrant abuse of his fundamental human rights. He held that the respondent failed to disprove the claims of the applicant that he was arrested, blindfolded, tortured and chained to the ground for 8 days in Kenya before his extradition to Nigeria. Kanu, through his special counsel Aloy Ejimakor, had approached the court challenging his extradition from Kenya on June the 19th, 2022. Ejimakor told the court that the suit is of a special class and was primarily aimed at redressing the infamous unlawful expulsion of extraordinary rendition of Kanu, which is a clear violation of his fundamental rights under Article 12, Sub-Article 4 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, as well as Chapter 4 of the Nigerian Constitution. He said in addition to the rendition, he asked the court to readdress the myriad of violations that came with the rendition, such as the torture, the unlawful detention, and the denial of the right to fair hearing, which required by law before anybody can be expelled from one country to the other. And I will get back to that story shortly and look at the details and some of the arguments that were presented in the Federal High Court sitting in Umuahia. And so, as I said there earlier, the court has ordered for Kanu to be returned to Kenya, where he was extradited from. So I'd like to know your thoughts on that story as we continue and look at that. Okay, so we go to Burkina Faso, and Burkina Faso's military ruler, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, has appointed a government of 23 ministers. The new cabinet will run the country until civilian rule is restored in June 2024. It will be held by Prime Minister Apollinaire Joachim Tembela, a 64-year-old lawyer who was appointed to the post on Friday. The new cabinet is composed of 5 ministers from the former cabinet of Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba, the coup leader overthrown in the subsequent coup in September. 2 military officers occupy the key ministries of defense security. The new cabinet includes 5 women, and one of them had earlier led negotiations with the regional bloc ECOWAS on the timetable and deadline for the transition to civilian rule, a charter providing for a government of no more than 25 ministers, and a 71-member assembly was adopted on 14th October. It stated that the transitional president's term will end with the holding of a presidential election in July of 2024. We go to Somalia. Somalia has executed by firing squad 2 militants from the Islamic State group. The state-owned Somali National News Agency, SONA, reported that a military court found the 2 guilty of assassinations in the capital Mogadishu and Bosaso town in northeastern Bari region. The 2 were identified as Aden Mohammed Ali Mohammed and Mohammed Ali Mohammed Farah. Local media reports said many Al-Shabaab and Islamic State militants are still in prisons waiting to be executed after being sentenced to death. The Islamic State insurgents mainly operate northeastern Puntland, and they had claimed attacks in the past. Head over to Malawi. Malawi's President Lazarus Chakwera has fired Agriculture Minister Lobin Lowe and his deputy Madalitso Kambaue Wirima over what he termed incompetence and gross negligence. President Chakwera made the announcement in a televised address on Tuesday evening. The Agriculture Ministry is accused of botching the implementation of a program in which Malawian rural farmers are provided with subsidized fertilizer and farm inputs. Mr. Lowe has not commented on the accusations. The president has since appointed Sam Kawale, formerly the lands minister, to replace Mr. Lowe. The president said more charges in his cabinet will be coming in due course. Head over to Gambia, and the Parliament in Gambia will on today convene for an extraordinary session to debate the deaths of nearly 70 children linked to cough syrups made in India. The children were diagnosed with serious kidney problems, and on Wednesday's session, the Parliament will be the first by lawmakers in the country since the tragedy happened earlier this month. Gambia health authorities said there were no more new cases, but there are 82 existing cases and 112 recoveries. Most of the existing cases involve children aged between 1 and 2 years. Civil society organizations in the country are mounting pressure on authorities to take action against those responsible for importing the drugs. Health officials and the Red Cross have started a second phase of recalling the cough syrups. Police investigations have established that the Medicine Control Agency was established without a laboratory to test the safety of the drugs. That's new. President Adama Barrow has set up a commission of inquiry to investigate the deaths. Head on to Burkina Faso and head back there. Burkina Faso's military rulers have launched a drive to recruit tens of thousands of civilian volunteers to help the fight Islamist extremists. The commander of the force, called Volunteers for the Defense of the Fatherland, said the aim was to enlist about 50,000 new members. Candidates will receive 2 weeks of military training before taking part in operations across the country, which has been battling a jihadist insurgency since 2015. There have been 2 military coups in Burkina Faso this year, with the leaders of both promising to end the violence. And on the latest on the conflict in Ethiopia, the chairman of the African Union Commission has welcomed the fact that the Ethiopian government and Tigrayan forces have entered into talks aimed at ending the war that has devastated Ethiopia's northern Tigray region. Musa Faki said he was encouraged by the early demonstrations of a commitment to peace in the talks held in South Africa. The AU appointed mediators are the former presidents of Nigeria and Kenya, Olusegun Obasanjo and Uhuru Kenyatta, respectively, and South Africa's former Deputy President Phumzile Mlambo Nkuka. The UN, US and the East African regional body IGAD had observer status at the talks, Mr. Faki added. And we go to Sudan, where the military in Sudan fired tear gas in an attempt to stop tens of thousands of protesters marching towards the presidential palace. The protests took place across the country to mark the first anniversary of a coup that halted a democratic transition. Since the army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan seized power, there have been nearly weekly anti-coup marches. The security forces have been accused of killing more than 100 protesters in the past year. The military takeover prompted foreign donors to cut off assistance, and the Sudanese economy has been in turmoil. And then we go to the Central African Republic, where President of the Central African Republic has sacked the head of Constitutional Court, Daniel Dalan, for permanent impediment. Faustin Assange Tuodora decree came after 70-year-old judge last month threw out a bid by the ruling party to amend the constitution so that he could run for a third term. The opposition party Kwanakwa said it was appalled by the decree and will continue to recognize her as the head of the court. She was appointed to the post in 2017 and her term was due to end in 2024. The presidential decree said she would also lose her post at the university in the capital Bangui, where she was teaching, and it did not explain the permanent impediment. Mr. Tuodora, 65, won elections in 2016 and 2020. Many protests have been held against the court decision. We go to Niger. The former president Mahamadou Issoufou, has warned of dire consequences that befell the Sahel, a region plagued by acute insurgency. Issoufou further said that the war in the Sahel has been neglected by the world and instead more attention given to Ukraine, terming it a double standard. The former leader was speaking during the just concluded Dakar 8th edition of the Dakar International Forum. The former leader further said he held the international community responsible for the situation in the Sahel following the military intervention in Libya. The war's impact has been felt strongly in Africa, where food prices soared as imports, notably of cereals and fertilizer, was restricted. France and where other Western countries in the general are often the butts of accusations of neocolonialism in Africa, that they try to impose policies on local governments to promote their own economic interest. In the Central African Republic and Mali, Russia has built up close ties that have translated into Russian military support and weaning French out. We go to South Sudan, and South Sudan and Sudan have renewed commitment to the 2005 ABA protocols in the 2009 Hague ruling, which gave the disputed area a separate administrative unit. The deal struck in the Sudanese capital Khartoum on Tuesday was signed by Vice President of Sudan Sovereign Council Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, the South Sudan's presidential security advisor Tut Gatluerk. According to the agreement, the two countries resolved to stick to the provisions of the ABA protocols. They also agreed to allocate 2% each of oil shares to ABA and Morab State. Top ABA intellectuals, including Luke Abiong, who met with President Kiir recently before leaving for Khartoum for the talks, witnessed the signing of the document. Professor Abiong said the parties stressed that the resolution on the final state of ABA will depend on the outcome of the previous agreements. For his part, the Undersecretary in Sudan's Foreign Affairs Ministry, Dafar Al-Haj Ali Osman, said the aim of the deal is to achieve trust building among ABA people, awaiting the final resolution to the conflict. And we go to South Sudan again, and SPLM's political bureau has removed the first Vice President, Dr. Riek Machar, and Pagana Moom from its membership and declared the completion of the party's unification process. The resolutions were passed last week on Thursday, following the party's political bureau meeting chaired by President Salva Kiir. Dr. Machar was the deputy chairperson of the SPLM, while Amoum was the party's secretary general before the 2013 civil war. However, following the conflict, Machar formed what is now called SPLM-IO, while Pagan later formed the real SPLM. Speaking to the state-run broadcaster on Thursday, the acting SPLM Secretary General said the party decided to restructure the party and fill in positions held by Dr. Machar and Amoum because they have formed their own parties. Peter Lam both also said the political bureau meeting also recommended the replacement of members of SPLM who have died or joined other political parties. The party has also resolved to increase the political bureau membership to 35. According to Lam, SPLM has so far registered more than 4.5 million members across South Sudan. Go to Zimbabwe. Hundreds of Zimbabweans turned out on Tuesday for rallies against Western sanctions that the government has long blamed for the country's economic troubles. The sanctions, some of which dates back to 20 years, were imposed in response to alleged election rigging and rights abuses under the former President Robert Mugabe, who died in 2019. The United States and Britain maintained the targeted sanctions are not the cause of Zimbabwe's problems. About 500 Zimbabweans gathered in the city of Bulawayo on Tuesday for an anti-sanctions rally organized by the ruling ZANU-PF party. Zimbabwe's Vice President Constantino Chiwenga read a speech for President Mnangagwa that was aired on national television. US, Britain and European Union officials have long rejected Zimbabwe's accusations, saying that the sanctions target individuals and certain companies rather than the state institutions. They say mismanagement of the economy is the key factor behind Zimbabwe's long economic slump, which dates back to 2000. Last week, James O'Brien, the U.S. State Department sanctions coordinator, told an online press briefing that U.S. sanctions are not hurting Zimbabwe's economy as they do not affect banks. As a much bigger problem, he said, is the tax revenue lost from billions of dollars in black market cross-border transactions that take place each year. And that is the latest news from across the continent. from the continent of Africa. Okay. Ibekwe Chonchima. The term I used there is the right term to refer to what happened to Nnamdi Kanu when he was forcefully taken from Kenya and brought to Nigeria. Okay, that is the right legal term. Okay, I'm a journalist. I deal with legalities, all right? But you have the right to your opinion. So thank you so much for watching and for commenting. Chimogo Chibaike, thank you so much for your time and the rest of you who are watching. So we started with the breaking news just a couple of hours ago, I believe, from Nigeria. The Federal High Court sitting in Umuahia, the Abia state capital, has ordered the federal government to pay the leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, Nnamdi Kanu, the sum of about 500 million Nigerian naira as damages for following his illegal abduction and human rights abuse from Kenya. So I don't know which part of that, Ibekwe, you do not understand what I said, but that is what I said, okay? Please pay attention. Pay attention, all right? And so the court presided by Justice Anyadike insisted that the extradition of Kanu from Kenya without recourse to the legal process was a flagrant abuse of his fundamental human rights, which I think we all agree. There are proper channels that are supposed to be followed, and of course the case and the numerous charges that the government side had labeled against Kanu, they were not able to really back up these claims. The fault because if you cannot back, and we were having this conversation here last time, if you say that is what he did and you want him to these very heavy charges that the government brought against him, then surely if you're saying he's a terrorist, the court asked, do you have a proof of when this happened, these terrorist activities happened, and where? You know, so the government could not really present a strong case to back up their claims. So the court did what it was supposed to do and dismissed this case and ordered for him to be released. I'm not in Nigeria, so I don't know if he has been released or not. I have not read anywhere any kind of news. And so just now, a few hours ago, the court made another ruling to really indict the government, the federal government of Nigeria. And I'll just read a bit of presentation that his lawyer made. Ejemako told the court that the suit of a special class that was primarily aimed at redressing the infamous unlawful expulsion or extraordinary rendition of Kanu, which is a clear violation of his fundamental rights under Article 12, Sub-Article 4 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, as well as Chapter 4 of the Nigerian Constitution. He said, in addition to the rendition, I'm asking the court to redress the myriad violations that came with the rendition, such as the torture, the unlawful detention, and the denial of the right to fair hearing, which is required by law before anybody can be expelled from one country to the other. And I think others will argue, as I see one of our viewers there saying he was not expelled, he was not extradited. Yeah, he was kidnapped because he was removed from Kenya against his will. So you can choose to use whichever words that you feel best describes the situation. But according to his lawyer, he said, proper law was not followed before anybody that can be expelled from one country to the other. And we know that he was removed from Kenya without his will. He was forcefully removed, and I think once he's made free and he's out of the country, maybe he can come out and really tell the world what really happened. And so I'll just read a bit of what the lawyer said, part of his presentation to the court today. You will recall that on January 19th, 2022, the High Court of Abia State decided that portion of violation of Kanu's fundamental rights that occurred in 2017, even as I had made claims that bordered on rendition. The court declined jurisdiction on grounds that rendition, being related to extradition, lies within the exclusive jurisdiction of the Federal High Court. So such a case was to be heard on the levels of a High Court. This was what informed my decision to initiate the suit before the Federal High Court. So he was explaining the background on how this case ended up there. And to be sure, he continues, to be sure, the extraordinary rendition of Nnamdi Kanu triggered a myriad of legal questions that cut across multiple jurisdictions in Nigeria and even triggered the international legal order to boot. In other words, the rendition has expanded the matter of Kanu far beyond the realms of the Abuja trial and opened up a new legal frontiers that must be ventilated to the hilt before the other courts and tribunals within and outside Nigeria. And thus, this very case before the Federal High Court in Umuahia is one of such that is aimed at seeking a definitive judicial pronouncement on the constitutionality of the extraordinary rendition. The ones in the United Kingdom, Kenya, African Union, and United Nations are in addition. And he concludes by saying, I would like to seize this opportunity to express my profound appreciation to the highly competent and hardworking team of lawyers that I'm leading in the prosecution of this complex suit. Special mention must be made to barristers Agazie, Nworgo, Arubonye, Amadi, Umazie, and others. And he was speaking to journalists shortly after the judgment. Ejimako said the judgment had shown that the court still remains the last hope for the common man. He called on the federal government to obey the court order and return Kanu to Kenya. So I don't know how you feel about that, because I see a lot of you are watching. So the lawyer wants Kanu to be returned back here to Kenya, I think according to the law, and he quoted what Nigerian constitution says and making reference to other constitutions, international laws around such matter. And I think according to him, he should be taken back from where he was forcefully taken from, and that will be here, and maybe he can make his way back to London. It's very interesting. So I think now the big question remains, will the government of Nigeria honor this ruling? Because we know another ruling was made earlier on, just a couple of days ago, that the government has really not bothered to honor. Can you confirm with me if I think it's still in being held by the government, I believe? Right. Is he? You can tell me. You can type on there and tell me. I'd like to know. I don't think they've released him. They're still holding him against the constitution, against the ruling by the High Court. So if you're a country that is governed by the rule of law, then I think you're duty bound to respect, a court's decision. It's the High Court, the Federal High Court. So the government is supposed to respect any ruling coming from any kind of court. But I guess that is not the case as far as the government of President Buhari is concerned. So I guess we'll just wait and see how that will work out, and if at all they will agree for him to be released. Because I think it's unfair. If the court has made its pronouncement, that should be obeyed. That should be obeyed, and those decision by the court must be respected. So anyway, the Nigerian government is unable to back their claims. In a court of law, you don't work with hearsays, you don't work with your opinion, you don't work with what you feel is right or wrong. In a court of law, what you do is you present a case and then you back it up with evidence. Where did this happen and when? That means you're supposed to have evidence to support that. So I don't know how the the government prosecutor did not think. You wonder, how did that? They did not know that was necessary to back such a case with its magnitude. It's important. So I guess we will just wait and see how that will happen. So Buhari said he was pleaded to have a presidential pardon for Kanu. These are his words. I quote, "The matter in the court." Let me just read that. "The matter is in the court, so it's only court can decide now. Now court has decided. Why are you still keeping?" Oh, that is what he said. Okay, so Buhari said he would have wished to pardon Nnamdi Kanu, but because the matter was in the Federal High Court, so he washed off his hands, and so he said, let the judicial process, the legal process play itself out. Well, it just did. Respect that. You know, it just did. So respect that, I believe. So anyway, probably tomorrow they would have, maybe there will be a new development as far as that story is concerned. All right, there's something else that has really, that I wanted to look at. Was it in Burkina Faso where now they want to, hold on. Okay, I think I got it now. Burkina Faso's military rulers have launched a drive to recruit tens of thousands of civilians volunteers to help fighting Islamist extremists. When I read about this, I think I was reading in some other news website, they're planning to recruit over 50,000 or 50,000 civilians. And I think another website was saying 35,000. Whichever, this is a huge number of civilians who are being recruited, and they'll be trained for only 2 weeks. And I guess they'll be armed to go fight insurgency. If Libya has not been a good case study for Africa, I don't know when we're going to catch up on these lessons that we're supposed to learn as a continent. I see Somalia also, and I think this is an issue I raise here every now and then when we look at what the government is doing, and it seems to be doing a good job in fighting Al-Shabaab by engaging in local militia. So you're using another security, a potential security nightmare to fight a current security nightmare. Once you're done with Al-Shabaab, these new militias, they are militias. They will come in with their own demands. They will come in and want to be part of that government. And there will be another headache as far as security is concerned. You can take that to the bank. I'm not a what do you call it, a security expert, but most likely they will not just help the government and then go back to whatever they've been doing, their militancy activities. They will feel they have a right and they've earned it, and they would want to be rewarded as such. So for Burkina Faso to get this amount of civilians, I said one website I read, they're saying 50,000, and the other one is quoting about 35. Either way, this is a huge number of people. You want to train them for 2 weeks, you want to arm them, and then they go help you fight the insurgents, the extremist groups there in Burkina Faso. That is what happened in Libya when they were fighting Gaddafi, civilians who had no knowledge, who had no forces discipline, who had nothing. They were armed, given arms. NATO armed them properly. After Gaddafi died, nobody cared to come and collect these arms. See what Libya has turned into. See what is happening there. So you think you've solved one problem. Now they're dealing with a bigger problem. I think Libya was better off when Gaddafi was still alive. And look at the effect. And after the uprising and what Libya turned into, and look at how much that has affected the majority of the countries in the Sahel region. A lot of the instability and the extremist activities that you see around that area in Africa emanate from that since 2011. Before that, there were minimal activities here and there, but now it has become a thing. So if you go arming the civilians in Burkina Faso, you are not solving anything. I don't know who advises this government. You are not solving anything. And I think those are some of the proposals I also see in Nigeria. Some senators and governors and local governments and even the government proposing, asking people to get arms if you can, asking people to form village militias or vigilantes or whatever to try and help and fight these kidnappers and all this kind of chaos that goes on in Nigeria. If the government gets to a level where now you place the responsibility of securing the people and the country to the people themselves, the right thing to do is for you to step down. As the head of state, your first responsibility is to protect the lives of the citizens and the country and their property. So if you weren't able to do that, and you want the civilians to instead protect themselves because you have failed in your mandate, you have no business sitting there as a president. You shouldn't be a leader of any country. So for me, Buhari is supposed to have resigned long time ago. He has failed miserably. And every time I hear him defending his legacy as far as dealing with insecurity in Nigeria, I cannot believe it. He thinks he's done an excellent job. But we all know too well that that is not the case, and among other African countries. And I remember before President Idris Deby of Chad was murdered, I think he also had similar proposals. Now it makes a lot of sense how he was taken out and his son was installed when you look at it just slowly. Because one of the things he was looking at is perhaps finding ways to go to the table with these insurgents, these militant groups. And perhaps somebody somewhere was not very happy, because they had had a continued war with this extremist group and it was not bearing any fruit. It hasn't yet. So it's a bad idea. Burkina Faso, it's a bad idea. You are creating more complexities as far as the insecurity is concerned, arming this number of civilians. How will they account for these arms? How do you know that they will not go and form other village vigilantes like we see in South Sudan when they were just arming everybody, those soldiers that were taken for training? Others ran away and came back to the villages and they formed other vigilantes and other criminal groups, and they started terrorizing people. But initially they were armed in the name of being trained so that they can work with the government in taking care of the peace in South Sudan. When it comes to security, it's not something that we should take lightly. And I think as Burkina Faso is losing it, they're losing it. That new president, his name is Ibrahim Traoré, the leader of the country. He said he wanted to disband the military, so he has not done that yet, so I think that is a good thing. But this idea of arming civilians, will pose a bigger challenge for that country, and that will have Burkina Faso fall into a civilian civil war. I think it will take a different facet. And that is very dangerous, and I'm nervous every time I read such news. You can't solve one problem by creating even a bigger problem in the future. It doesn't work like that as far as security is concerned. So I'd like to see. So I guess people will turn out, and young people will be drafted for this, and they'll be ready to fight for their country. Wrong move. Wrong move. So I hope they get to rethink that, because that's not the way to go, I believe. I'm not a security expert, but I don't think that will be the ideal situation or way to solve the insecurity problem in Burkina Faso. And very interestingly, because that is one of the reasons why they removed President Christine Kabore, right? The issue of insecurity. Now I was just wondering, now you have the military who understands better the security, and they have been defeated. So perhaps they're looking back and thinking maybe even removing President Christian Kabore was not a good idea, because now they are the military and they're in charge of the country, and they're unable to effect any changes. It's not a small task. It is not. The issue of insurgency in the Sahel region requires a lot. Okay, and for what I foresee in the near future, when this new president is not able to really get a hold of the runaway insecurity, I see another coup. I see another coup in the offing. It might happen from reading from what we're seeing and what is happening, because I'm sure there are also a section of the army in the country that is not happy that this 34-year-old is the leader of that country right now. So the situation in Burkina Faso is very dicey. So hopefully that will be sorted out soon. So anyway, the Zimbabwean, let me just talk about this very quickly, then you can just wrap up the show. Zimbabweans turned out to the streets yesterday, and there were rallies, and they were rallying, protesting against the Western sanctions that the government has long blamed to be the country's economic troubles. I think it's about time these Western countries lifted these sanctions against Zimbabwe. I feel like they're making President Emerson Mnangagwa pay for what they felt were the sins of the late President Robert Mugabe. And the reason being, he worked in the Zimbabwean, the former Robert Mugabe's government for a long time. He was an ally until they fell out, and he was he inherited, that position. And so I think they will continue. Maybe if a different person comes to power that is not in ZANU-PF, because I think they do have some graduate ZANU-PF, because ZANU-PF was very instrumental, like in his fighting the colonialists and all that. So they just have a bad taste as far as ZANU-PF is concerned. So maybe if Zimbabwe got another leader from a different party, or I don't know if Chamisa became the president, maybe that would make a difference. I don't know. So I feel like they even sanctioned actually ZANU-PF. Who sanctions a party? Who does that? It has been sanctions, and these sanctions are really hurting the economy and the people of Zimbabwe. So I get surprised, because I know Zimbabwe was pushing to be allowed back to the Commonwealth. That makes my head spin, and for good reasons. And you might agree with me or not. Because Britain single-handedly rallied other countries against destroying Zimbabwe, the economy, these sanctions. Britain is the ringleader. I will not get into the details of the land, the land issue, the land question, where Robert Mugabe said, the people need their land, because this land belongs to the black people in Zimbabwe, and it was taken from them forcefully. And so the people needed the land back. And there was an agreement that was made between Britain and Zimbabwe and other stakeholders, and they were supposed to pay these white farmers or just help in the processing of these transfers and all that. Britain bailed out on and negated on its promise. So Zimbabwe until 2000, Robert Mugabe was the darling to the West. But when he started fighting for his people and asking, he was vilified heavily. So it is the price that the people of Zimbabwe continue to suffer because of whatever choices that their leader made that was going to benefit his people. So when I see the leadership of Zimbabwe under President Mnangagwa begging and crawling and insisting of wanting to join the Commonwealth, I don't get that. I don't get that. A country that worked single-handedly to bring Zimbabwe to its knees. Britain is responsible. Together with these other countries, it rallied these other allies. And so I think these sanctions are necessary, are absolutely unnecessary. There are countries where they have a bad human rights abuse record, because that's one of the excuses they're using. I'm not saying Mnangagwa is doing well in that, but there are countries that are terrible in that, like Uganda under President Museveni. They were told that he's closing down on democratic gains in Zimbabwe, and I don't know what else. I'll use the example of Uganda. Have you seen how the opposition is handled in Uganda? And yet Britain and these other countries have no problem trading, supporting, aiding Uganda and other countries that have terrible records of this, like even Rwanda. But because it's Zimbabwe, it's looked at differently. I think it's absolutely unfair. And maybe Zimbabwe needs to find other ways of addressing its issues without necessarily going to the same people who have caused you the misery and beg for them to be, again, the part of the solution that you're looking for. It's oxymoronic and ridiculous. And these sanctions are equally ridiculous. And I think the people of Zimbabwe deserve better. Let me just stop there, because I feel like now I'm venting. I'll see you tomorrow. This has been Diaspora Dispatches. My name is Miriam Ogutunju. The rest of your day. Bye-bye.